for those that I haven't met before, my name's Leah Boyce. I work for NECA, which is the National Electrical and Communications Association. We are the industry body for electrical contractors and the electrical industry. And we've been working with Ray for a number of years now, doing seminars and workshops and education for members on business management. So and a bit about Ray. Ray's worked with people for over 35 years in different roles. He's been a leading consultant for the last 10 years across the country. He helps people with people and processes and addressing efficiencies. And he's worked from anything from small companies through to Prime Minister and Cabinet and everything in between. So, and he's working with a few of our members in South Australia and certainly some in other states as well, New South Wales and Queensland and such. He's been delivering workshops for us for the last few years and been always really well attended, great feedback, and we really love his work. So so thank you, Ray, for putting this on. Certainly leadership is a massive, or just managing employees in general, it's just a massive topic at the moment. I think ongoing, it's quite hard for employers and possibly, getting harder. So this is a very topical issue, and hopefully everyone enjoys today's session. I will just a couple of housekeeping things. We've just made this as a Zoom meeting so that we can have a bit of interaction. But if you could just turn off your microphones unless you have a question, just in case of background noise. Also, we are going to have 3 interviews today. So Ray is going to be interviewing three guests. So whilst those interviews are on, could we just ask that you turn your video cameras off, just so that then we can make sure that those speakers are front and center. Also, we are recording today's session, so just wanted to let you know. So once again, if you don't want your face on the recording, then you can turn your camera off. And I think that's pretty well it for housekeeping. I think that's it from me, and I'll hand over to Ray to get started.
Thanks, Leah. A number of years ago, I was when I was first doing public speaking, I was speaking to a group of about 150 people. And I was speaking on making the most out of life, living a fulfilled life. And I thought I was hitting a home run. People were smiling, they were kind of engaging sideways with each other. And I was having a great time. I was feeding off their energy. And about 20 minutes into the session, a man walks down the center aisle and puts a note over the lectern, and on the note it said, "Raymond, your fly is undone." And it was at that point where within a millisecond I realized that there was no discreet way of doing up my fly, and because I was young in the speaking profession, I had to call halftime. I was severely embarrassed. I wouldn't worry these days about it. And call halftime, and then got back on the stage and delivered my speech for the remainder of it. But I reflected on that over the years, and that audience was actually a mirror. It was reflecting back to me what I thought was a home run, but it was actually, the color of my undies and the fact that my fly was undone. And I've never done that since, and I've certainly improved that before I go on stage. Sitting at a desk here is, it's okay. But that audience was a mirror, and I've come to see over time that our businesses, our organisations reflect back to us its leadership, the good the bad, the ugly. This really hit home to me a number of years ago. I was consulting to two very similar companies in a city, but they were in different suburbs. One, they were both serving the same type of customers, the same similar products, and the economy was the same. One business was run by a business owner that really complained about his staff. He couldn't get good people. The ones he had stole from him. They showed up late, buggered off early, and his business was anything but tidy, and he wasn't profitable. But the one in the other suburb was run by a gentleman whose staff spoke really highly of them. I don't think he could have got rid of them because they loved him and they'd been there for a long time, and he would have had no problem getting other staff. His place was tidy and they were profitable. And it was one of those moments, again, where I realized that, you know, we can make changes out in our businesses and with people and systems and improve this and that. But really it's leadership that the higher quality leaders we are and those we recruit and train to perform highly, it's really reflected out into the organization. That might be if we run a team of 3 people, it might be broader in a department or across the whole business. A number of years ago, I was asked to work with a small team in Sydney, and the business owner called me in. He said, the supervisor's a fantastic guy, but the team's just inefficient and unproductive. He said, I really need your help to drive performance and productivity. And I subsequently met and did some coaching with the supervisor. And in the first session, I said to him, I said, tell me something personal about each of your team, each individual. And he kind of looked back at me and stared rather blankly. And he could only think of one personal thing about one of his team members. The rest he didn't know. And when I asked him about that, he said, well, you know, when they come to work, I expect them to work and they leave their personal shit at home, and that's just how it is. And it really came down to him through the time that he didn't want to ask them about their life because he didn't want them asking him about his life. And anyway, I gave him an exercise to do. I said, I'd like you to every week ask 1 or 2 surface questions of interest about your people. How was your weekend? What did you get up to last night? Oh, do you have kids? You partnered? Where'd you go for holidays and so forth? I even had him ask the checkout operators at Woolies or Coles, wherever he went to ask how their night or day had been. And over that 3 months, apart from some other tweaks to systems and process, the team really came together, became a bunch of individuals to a cohesive team and drove efficiencies and productivity. So at the start, when I started working with him, his team reflected him as a leader in their fragmented state. But at the end, after 3 months, as he took personal interest in them, they again reflected his leadership, which was awesome. And that just came about from taking a personal interest in people. I remember an accountant saying to me once, he said, you know, I wish people would just leave their personal baggage at the front door. He just wanted them to come in, do their work, go home, and then deal with their life outside of work. Now, some people I've found are good at detaching, but the majority, depending on the gravity of their situation and what they're facing and going through, bring their life into work. And I've always seen it as paramount for us in any leadership situation to take an interest. And it doesn't, again, we don't have to dig down into, you know, the personal depths, but it's really taking a personal interest in our people, because just that interest and expression of value whether we like it or not, just, well, we would like it. This drives engagement and productivity and performance through the organisation and the people we lead. Again, another consulting assignment I did, it was a very large company, and I was working with one of the human resource managers, and through that time among a number of other people. And this guy was an off the charts, hard, fast, driven, results-oriented guy. And he was all about work and productivity. And he had an assistant, and she was his direct opposite. She'd walk in to the office on a Monday morning and just breeze in, effervescent and bubbly. And she'd ask Mark, you know, how was your weekend? What did you get up to? And I remember Mark coming to me at one stage, totally frustrated. Now, if you don't like 4-letter words, please just close your ears, because I'm going to tell you exactly what Mark said to me. Mark says to me, I don't give a fuck about what she did on the weekend, nor do I want her asking me about what I did on the weekend. I just want her to go to her desk and do her work. So I tried to do a little bit of work with them to bring them together, and kind of didn't go too far. Mark subsequently left that company, and 6 years later, I got a call from Mark. He was an operations manager at another engineering firm, and asked if I'd come in and do a little bit of work with him and his team. After the first day and a half of working with them, I was amazed. I interviewed all the people around him, his colleagues and the work, those that worked with him. And the reviews were incredibly favourable about his interest in them, how he valued them. Yeah, we still, you know, demanded of them. But there was this expression around Mark that was, gosh, so different to 6 years ago. And I was so intrigued. So recently, I've been writing a book that's due for publication next year called How Efficiency Changes the Game. And I included Mark's story in it. And I wanted to document what had happened between, and the changes that happened from when I first knew him to 6 years later. And so I've asked Mark to come onto today's session with us to talk about what happened in that those mid-years, those 6 years. So welcome, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Sorry, I had it on mute.
That's all right. So yeah, it was quite a change. So tell us how you went from hard ass to soft heart in 6 years.
Well, I guess if we go back to the start, it was exactly like you said. It was I had my KPIs I had to hit. My manager was very expected big results, and therefore I guess I fed that down the line to anyone within my team. And I guess there was probably a bit of probably a bit of immaturity too, I guess, coming into that role from where I've been previously. But one of the game changers was also being made aware of it through the work you did within the business, and that was probably the step one.
Yeah.
One, being made aware of it and having a chat about it, so that you did have a bit of self-awareness. Yes. And also understand exactly what you said before, that looking into the mirror, what you put in is what you get back. So I guess that was step one. After leaving that business for no reasons orientated with the team or anything, just a life choice, I was working for a civil construction company, and a rather large company. I think at one stage we had about 1,800 employees and contractors within the company at one stage. So a lot of a very busy company, so to speak. And it was, I guess, one day after being there for about 12 months or so, and me trying to work on myself and the way I approached people and situations and taking an interest in anyone else. I actually set out within myself to at least ask one person every day how the day was or how things travelling.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And through that process, I come across a diesel fitter one day walking through the yard, and we sort of met at the back of a ute, a dual cab Hilux mine spec ute. And as we went over the side of it, I said to him, "How's your day going, mate?" Just making a bit of small talk. And he sort of, I can still remember the look in his face when he looked back at me, and he said, "Oh, not real good." And I said, "Oh, mate, what's happening? Tell me about it." And his next response was probably, I would say, step 2 in reassuring me that it is so important to ask people and take an interest in how they're travelling, because it only takes 5 seconds to do that. His response back to me was, well, while I was driving in from site, I was literally lining up the trucks and picking out which truck to drive in front of. And I sort of paused and had to process that really quickly because I didn't want to look like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
And I sort of went back to him and said, "Well, mate, what do you mean by that? Tell me a bit more about that." And he said, "Well, mate, I had the truck lined up. I was doing 100k an hour. Truck would have been doing about 100k an hour, and I was all but about to do it." And I could tell by this guy's face that he was dead serious. There was absolutely no mucking around, and I straight away thought, well, gee, I need to dig deeper into this. So we stood around the back of that ute talking for some 20 minutes, half an hour, going back and forth. And in the end, I said to him, "Well, mate, how can we as a company, how can I as an individual basically help you get through that and have a different outlook on life? Like, how can we support you as an employer?" And I went through a range of things, do you want to catch up and have a chat and rah. And the biggest thing for him was I'd said to him, let me line up some counselling for you. Let me see, if we can put you in touch with a counsellor or a psychologist, to which he agreed to. But in him agreeing to it, he had one demand, and which was he wanted myself to accompany him to the counselling appointment, and not just to the appointment, but he wanted me to be his support mechanism in the appointment.
Wow.
Initially, I didn't think too much. I was, yeah, mate, whatever, because I was just, once again, goal orientated.
Yeah.
With trying to support him and get him in touch with the right person to sort of talk through that part of his life. In the initial, without diving into any confidential information about the the appointment, in the initial conversation, it became very aware to me that if I had not stopped on that day, which was the day previous, if I had not taken that 5 seconds to ask one guy how his day was going, how he was travelling, he potentially was not going to be on the face of this earth that next day. This guy was dead serious. He broke down 100 times during the consult. And after the consult, when we walked away from it, with another one booked in, the counsellor said to me, "Mate, well done. I don't think this, if it had been left another couple of days, this appointment wouldn't have existed." So that probably took care of the next couple of steps in my life as an individual, as a leader within the business.
Yeah.
And after some 2 to 3 months, the guy was still gainfully employed by us. We'd supported him through that process. I'd heavily supported him through the process. And all it basically was that he was working away from home. He'd been doing some stints where he couldn't afford to fly home and see his family. And workload and so forth, and everything just mounted up to where he just couldn't handle it anymore. But through that
one
question, which was an absolute game changer for him. And about probably 12 months later, he left the business on another adventure, and he moved back home closer to his family so he could be with them more. And we stayed in touch for a little bit after that. But that was one, I sort of walked away from that day going, absolutely wow. Like, it took me a bit to process that. But it's something that I took on very heavily and absolutely understood 100% that I needed to invest in people to get the best out of people. And that, I've never forgotten that moment.
Yeah. And that took you to get involved in Mates in Construction?
Yes, correct. Yeah. It was sort of, I sort of took a bit of a look at the whole scenario, and I decided then and there, well, wow, that was just one question. The Mates in Construction absolutely coincided with asking a mate how he's travelling, whether it's personal life or work life, and taking that 5 minutes to ask the question if you're okay.
Yeah.
And through that process, I think that actually developed me in more ways than one would think. It wasn't just about preventing suicide, but it was 100% about the best way to approach a person, the best way to walk up to a person and have a casual conversation, even if you don't know them from a bar of soap, but to be able to invest in all different types of people, no matter what their nature is, no matter how my nature reflects with them, but just to be able to engage in that conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so when I met you some 6 years later, and your team gave, such good reviews, what would 3 things that you took out of that experience that into that new team environment where you were, that you would have actually implemented for them to actually feel such value? Was it just asking them how they're going, or was there more to it than that?
I think the biggest one is understanding what leadership is. Yeah. Leadership isn't wielding a bat. Leadership isn't yelling at people. Leadership isn't, being hard and fast with people. Leadership is, and this is just my words, leadership is mentoring, and coaching the team, lifting the team, and also having the team around you understand that you are part of the team, regardless of your role description, regardless of what title is sitting under your name on an email, but just moving through that mentoring process, and it's exactly takes us right back to the very start of looking in that mirror. What you put in is what you get out.
Yeah.
And I certainly, as an individual and as a leader of business, I walk into work every morning, and you've literally got to do that little self-check as you walk into work and go, exactly how I'm about to present to all the staff, the whole of the business, that is the type of day we're going to have.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
So, Mark, your style back when I first knew you, as I described, was hard, fast, driven, results-oriented productivity. Do you still have the same management style, but it sounds like it's just softened around the edges, or has your style completely changed?
No, I'd say my style has completely changed. I wouldn't say 100%. It's been hung up in the cupboard and I've grabbed a new coat out, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's still a time to be hard and direct with the team, whether it be with a team or an individual. But there's also a time and a place. And I guess to where we are now, to where 6 years after that event, I'd learnt the the lines in the sand and got to understand it a lot better through understanding myself better of, one, controlling emotions, two, deploying the right emotion for the right situation, and two, understanding that just because I've got something going on, it doesn't mean someone else has something going on that isn't bigger than what I've got going on. So I would say my leadership style has developed, and it's developed to a level where it gets positive results. I'd say damn well good positive results.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I certainly saw that. And just a final question. So would you say that, because it was going to, that was a question you've answered in a sense of, holding the balance of caring for people and showing interest in them with the whole side of performance management and accountability. Have you found that the more people sense the value from you to them, the more they're open to critique and being held accountable for results? Or have you found anything else different to that?
Yeah, very much. Like the workplace that exists today, it's a very, very highly productive workplace, and it's a very highly geared workplace, as in orders come in and they need to be out last week. The team today, they 100% know the expectation. They 100% know the accountability that comes with that expectation. But at the same time, they're also happy to walk in and say, "Can I have 2 minutes, 5 minutes?"
Yeah, that's great.
And they're happy to sit down, have a chat to me, and go, "Mate, I'm not traveling so well. I've got this going on, this going on, this going on." And it's not that they want to use that as an excuse. They just want to know that as their leader, that I understand where they're at any given time, and just in case they need a hand up. And it might be that the call they're about to make mightn't be 100% spot on. So it allows me as a leader to keep my ear to the ground and keep a bit better eye on what's happening for the day in case there is a situation that arises. And that, Ray, I've honestly got to say that has been a journey in itself for myself.
Yeah.
And it's also been an absolutely rewarding one, being where I was so long ago to where I am today, with having the team's trust, because that's absolutely what gets results. They feel empowered, and they are empowered. Not just that they feel empowered, but they're empowered. They're trusted. I'd put my life in the hands of any of my team here, and they know that. And with that, they also 100% understand the accountability and expectation that comes with that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your story.
No dramas.
I was just going to ask, is anybody got, we'll just have time for one question. Anybody got a question for Mark? Going, gone. Okay, thanks, Mark. We'll move on. So right people in the right roles, performance improvement and motivating our team is part of leadership life. And one of the things I've found over time is that we hire good people with high technical skills, but there's other leadership abilities, traits and behaviors and skills around that technical expertise that let them down. Like the electrician, the supervisor, and the project manager I mentioned at the start. He was brilliant technically, great at managing projects, but his interest in people let him down. And so the team he was trying to manage and the projects he was managing were inefficient and unproductive because of that one leadership trait. And one of the things I've, again, having, as Leah said, worked with people for over 30 years now in coaching and managing and now consulting, is that I've noticed and observed similar traits in different people that I call behavioral traits, 5 different areas. And I call them behavioral and traits because I've got a belief, you may disagree with me, but I've got a belief that each of us have a default style that we're born with. We tend to gravitate to certain behaviors and attitudes. Now, like Mark has just mentioned, life changes come in and shift us. But in some ways, Mark is still, very focused from a productivity point of view, getting results. He just goes about it a different way. And some of those behaviors and traits he's changed. So what I'd like to do is just share these 5 with you. I'm just going to share my screen. This is always a bit of a challenge from a technical point of view. So on the screen, you should have 5 areas. Can I get a nod from Mark? Are they on the screen? I'm always scared. Yep. Okay. They're always scared. I'm always scared that they don't show, but there they are. So I'm going to run through these briefly and just explain some practical ways of getting improvement with people. So we've looked at the foundation of taking an interest in people. This is now moving to some practical methods that I'd like to share with you and that I actually use in my coaching work. And hopefully there might be some value here that you can take away and implement with coaching your people, managing your people. So task approach. People tend to either approach their days and their tasks in a planned, methodical manner, or tend to be a little bit more spontaneous. Their orientation, they gravitate toward tasks or people orientation, where so if someone calls you at 10:15 in the morning and says you want to do a coffee, if you're people oriented, you will more than likely say, yeah, sure, I'll meet you in 5 minutes. If you're task oriented, you'll say, look, I've got the morning planned, I'll meet you at 1:20 p.m. this afternoon for 20 minutes, and you'll slot them in. Pace, people fast paced, like I initially met Mark, move at a fast rate of knots and try and achieve a lot in a short amount of time. And then you've got the more moderately paced, easy paced person who thinks, tends to think a little bit slower, sometimes a little deeper, process the finer points. Their work style, you've got the maintainer who loves managing a system within a routine. And then you've got the developer who's always looking for the next opportunity and the next mountain to climb. And then you've got the outlook of people. When they look out, some people see detail, like the dirt on the windows, and then other people see the big picture of what's beyond the windows. And so all of us are wired in different ways. And as you look at that list, you might see some of your own default behaviors, how you approach your days and your work, whether it's more planned, spontaneous, task people, and so forth. So how this works out in practice, and I'll just share a couple of examples of people I've worked with. So let's go back to the electrical supervisor I mentioned at the start. Great technical skill, but his issue was on the people side of things. And so when I coached him, I had to move him across this way. And so one of the things I did was I put a practical step or an action that he could fulfill every week. Ask your team how they're going, what they've done once or twice a week, and the supermarket checkout people. And so, which he fulfilled. And through that time, I held him accountable, supported, had a talk around the discussions he had, and helped him through that to the point where that behavioral change shifted the performance of his team. One guy I've been working with this year was a project manager for a civil company, and he went about his days over on this side. He was spontaneous. So, and the productivity because when you're project managing, obviously you've got to be pretty well planned. And because he gave little time to planning and planned on the run in a spontaneous fashion, things were quite unproductive and performance was down. So I had to move him back down this way. I gave him one exercise to start with, and that was take an hour at the end of every day before he left to let the guys keep doing their work, to plan the next day, and then communicate to the guys where they'd be and what they'd be doing the next day. That one thing changed his whole approach to work dramatically. The team, the productivity went up. And one of the other interesting comments about that was he said that, or the comments he made, was that he was less stressed, he was happier, and he was sleeping better from taking that 1 hour a day to plan. I had a finance business, and I had a girl that operated in admin for me. This was before consulting, and she really lived on the left hand of this behavioral side of things. Very planned, very detailed, very task oriented. Trouble was, I also had people calling, and she was on reception as well, and people needing to be welcomed into the business. She was so task oriented that whenever the phone rang or people came in, they were just annoying because they were interrupting her from tasks. And on the phone, it just wasn't all that welcoming. So I put a step in place for her, which was a mirror. And I put the mirror in front of the phone. I told her that people hear a smile. And before the phone rang, she just needed to smile and then put a bit of energy into her voice. And that changed that, again, that simple one step helped move her up the line. I worked with another girl who was in invoicing. Now, invoicing, obviously, you can't move through invoicing, converting job cards to invoices and get all the detail correct if you do it too quickly. And she was over here, and she was also a big picture person, but she had an error rate of 16%. So I had to move her this way. And so on the moderate, moving her here, I had her take an extra minute or two on every conversion from job card to invoice to check, just to slow down the process. And in here, to get a more detailed, I put a checklist system in place. That error rate went from 16% to 9% in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks, and then continued to improve further still. And the last one, I was working with a business owner in Perth some time back, and his role really sat in the maintaining side of life. He was managing the whole business. A lot of roads led to and through him. And in the first year of working with that company, I started to divert the roads away from him. So we put in systems in place, processes, procedures, changed people's roles to start redistributing his tasks. What became apparent as we were doing that was he was really born as a developer. He loved the pursuit of new projects and growing the company. So we set a goal for that company of 25% growth the next year, moved him 80% into business development, and he hit 32% for the year, which was outstanding. But again, all of these shifts, and I use real case examples because I've seen this stuff work, and it's really identifying where the weak point is, putting a step in place or some actions they can follow through, supporting them on the way through, holding them accountable, and then assessing results and making course correction on the way. So just before we move on, does anyone have any questions or situations in your work with the people that you're, running with, trying to lead, where some of these situations are playing out? Any questions on that? Very quiet.
It's like we've all got the perfect workforce, Ray.
I know. How are you, Richard?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll jump in a little bit. I think it's probably fair to say that all of us have challenges with different employees at different times. And as you say, a lot of the time it's beneficial to look in the mirror at ourselves, because I think, some of those issues we probably cause ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, that's good. No, thanks for that. Well, I'd like to bring our next guests online. One of my favourite speaking gigs that I've ever done was to a ladies' high tea in Sydney. And it was the wives and partners of electrical contractors put on by Simpro and Nika. This is from memory. It's going back quite a long time. Anyway, I was one of the guest speakers there. A number of years later, I was received a message from Lee Hicks, and she asked if I would meet with her and her husband to discuss some improvements they were looking at in their business. Subsequently, did some work with them. And I've brought them here today because they're awesome people. I think they're incredible leaders. They started back in 1992 on their own, I believe, as electrical contractors. They've since grown the team to 80 people. That's on their website. And they now have 6 divisions. They've got plumbing, electrical and data, civil, fire, security and CCTV, and fire protection. Makes me tired just thinking about all those divisions to run, and over 80 people. So welcome, Lee and Ian. It's good to see you, and it's nice to see a lovely boardroom.
G'day, Ray. Hi, everyone.
No, it's good to have you here. So I wanted to ask you, because there'll be businesses at all different sizes here, but how did you go in the early days when you started the business? So from my understanding, it was just you guys, and then you grew from there. Was my assumption right?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I started out, I just had an apprentice. I'm an electrician by training. Yeah, on my own. And then we employed one apprentice and then another tradesman. We just grew from there. Lee had her own business. She was a consultant, and she was like thrusted into doing invoices at night.
I'm an electronic typewriter, I might add.
Yeah. But then, as the business grew, we work together now. We've worked together side by side in the business for 28 years. So,
wow. And you're still together?
That's had its top trying times. Well, you've been here, mate. You've seen
You've seen it.
You've seen some of the issues, but it's all...
I don't think I ever saw anything being thrown, but yes.
Except a few words. Choice words.
So, Ian, I remember when I first started working with you guys, a few days after I was there, I remember commenting to you on the quality of the people. And I said to you something to the fact that in all my work, I had never seen such a cohesive quality team together in one place. And I never forget your words. And I think I've used it in my writing a few times. You said, well, we've done lots of weeding. So I wanted to ask you about the weeding process. How have you ascertained good people to recruit who is no longer a fit? We might allocate them to the weed category. You've planted lots of great flowers, and you've got a very verdant garden minus a lot of weeds. How have you gone about that process, weeding?
Yeah, well, I think the turning point was, and I hate using the word because I think it's overused so much, was the culture, was realising we needed to have a culture in the business. And so we had, I don't know, probably 20 people at that stage or something. So we had a meeting and we were there all day until we came down with 3 words, and it's teamwork, pride and responsibility.
Yeah.
And now when we employ people, they've got to fit into that culture. And it becomes apparent pretty quickly whether the people are going to fit or not, although we've grown a lot organically. Most of our apprentices are still here with us. A couple of them are in management roles, definitely majority of them are in senior supervisory roles. And that has certainly helped because they have an interest and a passion for the company as well.
Yeah, and so they essentially grow up and learn the culture from the ground up and absorb it on the way through. What happens when they don't absorb it?
I think it becomes obvious over time, that they're not absorbing it. And sometimes it's a matter that, they've thrived for a while and then they just get sick of it.
Yeah.
And, so there's a bit of natural attrition because people just go, oh, you know what, it was great while it lasted and I loved it, but now it's time for me to move on. And one of those was one of our senior managers, actually.
Yeah.
After you had been here for quite a while, it was like, I've grown up since I was a 17-year-old apprentice in this company, and now actually I've probably gone as far as he certainly hasn't lost any of the passion for what he enjoyed in the company. He just saw that he could see a light somewhere else.
Yeah.
Interesting thing is that light didn't end up being what he expected it to be, and sometimes that happens. But still, you've got to be philosophical about it and go, well, they have to go and see whether they might want to be in something different, We used to get quite offended when people couldn't see it our way and they thought the grass was greener on the other side. Yeah. We felt upset about that. It was almost, a slight on what we had here, but now I think we're a bit more philosophical about it, aren't we? It's kind of like, some people just have that need to move on, so they weed themselves out.
I think in the early stages too, and I'm sure anybody with employees would support this, in the early days we grew quite quickly and we're employing out of desperation. Yeah. And that's a big mistake. I understand that sometimes you've got to do it, but now we do more the field of dreams thing, and we build it, and the work will come. So if we feel that we're starting to get growth in one of the areas, we'll take our time, employ the right person, and then that makes the managers work harder to find that work for that person that isn't 100% utilised. Yeah. And it's worked quite well for us.
It's been a big thing in the last 12 months, particularly for us, a big change in what we've been doing.
Yeah, no, that's good. So when you identify somebody that's not part of the culture, let's stick with that for a minute, and they seem to have lost momentum, they were thriving and they start to wilt. How have you gone about helping them either thrive again or move out?
We would hope they wouldn't move out. We hope that we could bring them back into work with the culture. Most times you do. And a lot of times it's outside influences too. They might be having mortgage issues, and they're things that we sit and discuss with them to see why they've had a change. And it might be that because we're fortunate we've got the different divisions, they might say, well, I'd really like to try doing X, Y, Z, like going, I want to do the solar, I want to do the air conditioning.
Yeah, that's good.
And so we're able to sometimes to accommodate them into those other areas.
Sometimes it's a personality thing too. It's you've got them in a particular team and they work well in that team, and then maybe they move on to another team and it's just not a fit. And sometimes it's just, as I think Mark said earlier, it's just taking that time to have a bit of a conversation with them. And it might just be a perception at the time that things are not going as well as they might. And you just have a conversation with them and all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, if I do that training or if I step up and I do this, then something else might come up. I've seen one of our staff members in with one of our managers just this afternoon having that very conversation. He was the impression was he wasn't working as well as he might have been, but actually when the conversation was had, it was that he was just needing a bit more motivation to do something fresh. And when someone actually left out of his team, he went, oh, wow, I've got a chance now.
Cool. Yeah. So I get from that candid conversations are important.
Oh, definitely.
Have the difficult conversations early. Do not, I mean, so many times to say, no, it'll get better. It's not going to. Have the difficult conversations early and they're not so difficult.
Yeah. So how do you, I talked about some of that behavioural approaches I have to increasing performance. Do you have any ways that you use in particular to help underperforming people that you see have got huge potential? Have you got any ways and methods that you use to actually track people through those performance stages to increase their performance?
Well, you can use that example with some of our apprentices. So you bring apprentices on and we've now structured where they go first. So they go out to projects first and then they come back to maintenance. We used to put them in maintenance first and then send them out to projects. But if you send them out to projects, they're on the same site with the same people for a while and they get a chance to get their hands dirty and they're not sitting in a truck just chatting away while they're going from job to job to job. So you get a real feel for them fairly early in the piece because they have to work. Because they're on that site, they've got to perform. Yeah. And then you get a feel for their personality and you can kind of work out then where their fit is. We've had a few apprentices where we've had doubts and then we've put them with another style of work and then they've come good. But I think Ian's right, being honest with them up front and saying, these are the things that we're looking for. You need to speak up, you need to be proactive, you need to ask questions or talk to us if you've got issues and encourage that conversation early, I think. Yeah,
I think sometimes our managers, we love them to bits. They do a magnificent job, but there has been the occasion with one of the managers and things weren't moving so well. And I just think it's a realisation that you let them realise where you think that they're not performing. And then it's like the lights turn on. They go, I get it. You're probably right.
Yeah.
And it's not till you pointed out that they realise.
Yeah, and that shows the character of the people that you've got when the light comes on for them. It shows that teachability characteristic, which I think's gold. I wanted to ask you, and then I might open up for everyone for questions. I noticed when you sent through the update of your new website, looks fantastic, by the way. I had a look through the management team, and those guys have been there, since I was there a few years ago, and probably for well back beyond that. I wanted to ask you, how do you keep good people engaged, motivated, and not looking over the fence and being poached by, the big company down the road?
I think the first thing is they're involved with every decision we make in the business.
Nowadays.
Nowadays. Be it financial, be it employment, even down to should we change the range of vehicles we're buying.
Yeah.
I will probably me more so than Lee. I certainly was a dictator and say, well, this is how we're going to do it. But now it's how do you think we should do it?
Yeah,
and that's what we have a management meeting once a month.
Yeah.
And that's what we've always got an agenda and things like that are discussed with them. And they take ownership. I mean, we're just recently introducing a incentive scheme for the managers, and that's certainly helping a lot because they feel like they're and they are a major part of the business.
I think the one thing to add though to that is this whole session's focused a lot on the people skills, But, you know, one of the questions that you had suggested you'd ask about was, you know, what are some of the things that we might have not done so well before.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote down reporting, because people want to know what's going on and they want to see it in black and white and they want an explanation. Some people want numbers to the nth degree and some people just want overviews. Well, you've got to
big
be able
picture
to
and detail.
you've got to be able to give them, exactly.
Yeah.
When you were out here a few years ago, we had an almost forced change with our senior management, and then we're deciding which way we were going to go with structure. And we ended up saying to our managers, do you want to take 1.5 steps forward and actually be our active management team, or do you want to stay where you are? We won't bring other senior people in. And we made the conscious decision to bring in a financial controller. And I reckon that's where the turning point has started to come in this year. We've spent most of our year talking numbers. We don't normally talk numbers, we talk people. But we've been talking numbers for this past year, and now the number crunching is really starting to support the people management side of things as well. So it's getting that balance between the two things. And like Ian said, getting them involved, not being afraid. We used to be really afraid to tell them what our numbers were.
Yeah.
And it's been a real turnaround for us to start to share that stuff.
Yeah, because I know a lot of companies always deliberate on that, how transparent they are from the top to across their management teams. So that's...
So I think that's a trust thing too. Like they're starting, our management team now trust us more because we're more open with them. Yeah. So they're more inclined to then step up and say, oh, well, I did stuff up on this, or I need to change that, or here's a suggestion. And we've changed the way we do things as a result as well.
That's good. So when the managers see the numbers compared to when they didn't, what does that do for them in the management of their own departments?
Challenges them. They love the challenge.
Okay.
They see the dollars. They see some. It's interesting how some people deal in percentages and some deal in just numbers, which is quite interesting. But they see the numbers and they want to. I want to do better next month. I want to do better, and it is good. But we're always conscious of there's still people. You know, we're not here to make massive profits anymore. We're big past that in our age. So we just want to make sure that the people we've got are well looked after. They've got a future. That's pretty much how we run it.
Yeah, so it's a balance between the people side and the money side. It's very interesting because our guys, our management team, have made the jump from being project managers or operational managers into being well-rounded managers of their teams now. And next year, once the figures will be, because we're only just arriving at this point where we've got some really accurate figures, and we have a financial controller who would not, she's been here for over a year and she's hung on to those numbers until she could give us facts. She said, I'm not giving you anything that's half-baked. But now it's allowing the managers to start to look at the numbers and the people and realise, you know, how much personalities come into things. They're doing more leadership training, and it's sort of almost like, well, you know, I was always into that HR kind of stuff, but they were tradies that really didn't see much value in that. Yeah. And it's now that they're at this senior level, they're going, oh, gee, well, I kind of have to do all of it. And there's a couple of managers in particular that have just made huge leaps and bounds in that area. Yeah, I guess it's learning those surrounding skills, isn't it, around the technical side of things. So that's good. I'd like to open it up to the rest of you. Any particular questions? We've got about 5 minutes. Take your opportunity, because these guys have got a lot to share. 10 minutes isn't enough. We could keep going for an hour with you guys.
maybe you've answered every question. Can you talk a little bit more about, and just, I'll give another opportunity after this, just that incentive scheme. What made you put that in place for your managers?
We don't just want them to feel like they just get a salary and then the harder they work, they don't get anything extra.
Okay.
We don't want them, and this is all just being put into place as we speak. So we've worked out the structure of what the pool is going to be, but we've also worked out the guidelines of what they've got to achieve to be able to dip into that pool.
So it's performance based?
Yeah, and then what might happen if they don't achieve those goals, or, you know, if someone's a bit behind the 8 ball even going into this process. So if they haven't done as well in this year, because this is the first year, well, what's the consequence for them as opposed to what others will get because they work harder? The hardest part of it is it's really difficult to lock down, because you've got to say, well, what is out of their control? Even down to the point of, well, what numbers do we include in their costs for their overheads, and what are just costs for overheads that the business itself controls or that we control? So, you know, if we decide we want to give 10 grand to charity, do we have to go to them and get their permission? No, because it's our business. But if we do that, should they have to pay for that? No. So we've ended up our financial controller's been very good in splitting those things, and now we've got the head office bucket, what do you call it, the corporate bucket, corporate bucket, and the divisional bucket. You know, so, but we're still trying to pin down a few of those things.
We were all over the place when we first started. It was a complicated system up here. And we've had a great deal of help from Simon.
You've met Simon Clackworthy?
Oh, yes. Yeah, good guy. Yep.
He's been tremendous in helping us with that. So, and we had another couple of people helping us. But the basic thing is you just keep it as simple as you can. We've got 5 key areas that the guys have got to meet, and don't have to meet, but they're measures.
There's 5 key areas of measuring.
Yeah, and it's and that's when we call them in for their performance reviews. That's easy. You have discussions around those 5 areas.
Yeah,
and we're very excited about it.
That's what we're about to launch into now, is performance discussions with them. Now we've got data to back it.
Yeah,
you know, it's easy to go in there and say, oh, you know, you've retained, gained, and grown your division, but if Ian's brought half that work in for them,
yes, that's
they haven't done it.
Yeah, no, that's true. So I'll just open it finally to any questions anybody's got. Nope. Well, that's good. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your. One last question. If you were to start all over again, and you would do something really different at the start, is there any one thing around people that you would do differently?
Put on a financial controller.
But I think
and stand my ground.
I think Lee would agree, mate. No matter how small your business is, have written, documented procedures, and just build on them. So as your business grows, those procedures will change, but you'll also build on those procedures. And you don't have to have 1,000, but if you don't have guidelines, how do you make judgments on people?
Yeah,
you've got to have them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
If we were all here, we'd be.
Well, we can fly down there now, can't we?
Oh, yeah. Maybe today, who knows tomorrow.
We can come down and see you lepers now.
Yeah, that's right. All right, thanks very much. I'm going to invite to the stage a Mr. Tom Earls to finish our time off today. I've met Tom the last 12 months. He resides in Adelaide. And Tom started Fair Work Lawyers in 2014, founded it. He's been involved in IR and legal services for 15 years, representing employees and employers individually and collectively in a variety of jurisdictions. So it's good to have you here, Tom. And was that coffee and not a beer? I think last week I saw you had a beer in your hand at the...
Yeah, it'd be much preferable to have a beer. And I've got the world's biggest, it's a teacup. It's not coffee. I think I'd never sleep if I had a coffee cup that big. But anyway, thanks for having me.
No, it's good to have you here. I've heard you talk a few times at different events, and I've always been impressed with what you've had to say and your knowledge. I'd like to kick this off, and I'd just like to just mention for the attendees that if you want to talk stuff with Tom, now's a really good time to ask him any tricky questions that you've got around employment. So I just want to kick this off. So I was working with a company a number of years ago and doing a restructure. And through the process, I realized that one of the top roles wasn't needed because everything that they were doing could be dispersed to the managers underneath, and we didn't need that specific role. So we went through the legal process, which was onerous, mediation, everything else. We made the role redundant and the subsequent person in the process. And I just thought, could you update us as to the process these days around making roles redundant and obviously the people that go with those roles?
Yeah, no worries. I could be here for the next couple of months talking through all the nuances, so I'll try and keep it fairly high level. As you can probably imagine, the last 6 or so months, or it's a bit more than 6 months, you sort of lose track of time. I think everyone's lost track of time during the Great Plague, but we've been providing enormous amounts of advice to different clients in relation to redundancy, and so there's plenty of little circumstances or little nuances, I should say. And I'll just close my Outlook so it doesn't keep binging. There's circumstances that I won't necessarily cover. I'm happy to take questions from anyone. Look, in terms of redundancy, it's a relatively straightforward concept that then becomes very difficult because lawyers get involved in it. Australian law differs from a lot of other legal systems because we don't actually have an obligation or mutual obligation of good faith. You can compare that to, say, New Zealand and a few others that do have it. And what that means is that Australian companies have essentially an absolute right to make decisions about how they want to structure their business and what kind of labour allocation and resources they want to have. And that is a really important thing. That's what redundancy is. The language of redundancy has been lost in time. Most of what we're talking about was developed in the early 80s. And in particular related to really significant changes like moving from pools of typewriters to computers and automation in factories and things like that. And I'll get to that when we start talking about the consultation process you need to go through, because it's a very archaic process. It's kind of been jammed into the current system. But redundancy, as people understand it, is the decision that's taken, so I should say, redundancy at law is the decision that's taken to say, I'm going to move my chairs around. Now, it might be that you're going to have less chairs, more chairs of different colour, or whatever it may be, but that's the decision, that's the business decision. And so what we talk about there is the operational reason. So the first step of a redundancy is you have to have a genuine operational reason. Now, most decisions that you take to do with your business structure are quite clearly genuine operational reasons, but if you're dressing up a performance termination, for example, as a redundancy, that's where you get involved in arguments about, is it a genuine operational reason? And, am I changing the label from, accounts manager to accounts guru or something and not changing the substance of the decision? So they're the kind of things that can pop out. But for the most part, people have a genuine operational reason. That's the easiest of the hurdles to jump over unless you're trying to do something that circumvents the rules. And for reasons which I'll hopefully discuss later, in the second question that Ray sent me on notice, it's never recommended to try and dress up a performance termination as a redundancy. I think the last speakers hit the nail on the head, absolutely, when they use that phrase, difficult conversation. And time again, litigation arises because there is a gap between the employee's expectations and the company's expectations, because those hard conversations haven't been had. And it's when there's that gap, there's the shock of a decision. That people are coming to work thinking I'm okay. All of a sudden something changes, and they start to the conspiracy theories start, and all it takes is to get to one ambulance chasing lawyer and there'll be an application file, and that's the vast majority of litigious matters, which is typically when I get involved. Very few people ring me to say, hey, everything's going well in my business, and it's all hunky-dory. So that's the first step, is this genuine operational reason. Now, that used to be enough. That used to be all you needed to worry about with the redundancy. But the Fair Work Act's added a couple of other criteria that need to be considered. And this is in relation to unfair dismissal. So when we're talking about very senior managers, so that's people who are not covered by an award or an enterprise agreement and earning more than about $153,000 base, plus a few other bits and pieces. You should get advice if you're anywhere near the threshold. But assuming unfair dismissals apply, which they do in most cases, there's two other things that you need to think about. The first one's consultation, and the second one's redeployment. Now, consultation is the thing that is probably the most litigated. I mentioned that these laws were created, or a lot of this law was created back in the early 80s. And in the early 80s, they created this consultation process. And the consultation process talks about major workplace change that's going to have a significant effect on a business. Major workplace change was meant to be things like automation and computers and those sort of things. Now, that law kind of just trailed off into the sunset for a while. Awards had it in there. No one really followed it until the Fair Work Act came in and kind of rammed it back in sort of 25, 30 years after that concept had been developed, but essentially just grabbed it and threw it back in. So what the legislation says is you need to have complied with the consultation obligation contained within any applicable award or enterprise agreement. So almost everyone is now covered by an award. There was a change to the miscellaneous award to basically scoop up anybody who was not covered by an award unless they're a very senior manager or a professional employee in certain spaces. So most people are covered by an award. Now, the question is, does consultation apply? It's got to be major workplace change that has a significant effect. The significant effect's termination of employment. You tick that box. Unfortunately, depends which judge you get as to whether or not any change in the workplace is a major change. And you can read through different decisions of different judges to come up, well, commissioners, but to see which one believes one or which one believes the other. The difficulty you get is that you don't know which judge you're going to get when you're making a decision to make someone redundant. You don't even know if you're going to get sued. So typically the risk averse advice is to then say, okay, well, we'll go through a consultation process, because if you consult when you didn't need to, it can be unpleasant, but if you consult when you didn't need to versus if you didn't consult when you did need to, one is a drop dead and one is it's an unpleasantness, but something that you've managed and gone through and moved on with.
It sounds like people need to come to you or someone like you in the process.
Look, it's wise to at least read the consultation provision in any. They're all the same. So in any award, you can read the consultation provision, and you're not going to go too far wrong. But the third part of it, which is the nasty part, is redeployment. It becomes nastier the more that or the bigger you are, the bigger your business. So, for what it says is, in order for it to be a genuine redundancy within the meaning of the Act, it must not have been reasonable in all of the circumstances to redeploy the person within the business or within any associated entity. And so in those circumstances, you start talking about corporate groups, and at what point do you at what point is it reasonable to redeploy someone? If they stick their hand up as an account manager and say, I want to get on the tools, is that okay? If they say, what about interstate work? If you've got a national presence, if international work, there's all cases about this. So you do need to consider all those matters. So the bigger you are, the bigger an issue it is, and that's where you can use the consultation process to your advantage, because you can flush out a lot of these issues. For employers with 2,000 or 3,000 people, they might have 50 or 100 jobs going at any given time, and the law basically is you're meant to give the employee a list of the jobs and take them through it, or you take that risk that they're going to turn around and litigate, and you're going to end up in some convoluted process.
So Tom, we've got about we've got 5 or so minutes left, and I want to leave a bit of time for questions. Do you want to address the performance side of?
Just touch the other bit, the nasty bit. They're the three things about redundancy. This ties into every single decision you now take. The Fair Work Act introduced adverse action, and adverse action is basically sort of like discrimination and victimisation rules all merged together in this super law that is worded in the broadest possible sense. And adverse action now, the money you can make out of adverse action, the pressure you can apply to an employer is substantially more than an unfair dismissal. And so you should be far more worried about an adverse action claim than you should be about an unfair dismissal claim. Now, there's nothing you can do formally to stop adverse action. It's an allegation someone makes. The legislation's nasty because it's very broad, but also it contains a reverse onus of proof. So in other words, when you terminate a person, that's adverse action. Once you can show adverse actions occurred, it's presumed that you did it for an unlawful purpose, and you've got to then disprove the reason why you did it. And also, if it's part of the reason, even if it's not the whole reason, then that's sufficient for it to be adverse action. So there's a huge amount of risk, because really how your decision maker performs in the witness stand is what makes or breaks an adverse action application. And that both is the decision to make someone redundant, but also the decision to select a person for redundancy. So if you've got multiple people in a similar role and there's not an obvious selection, then you need to be careful to make sure you've got some objective evidence. In relation.
That's good advice.
And that ties into the next part, which is poor performance, because adverse action ties across everything. You can't stop it. It's important to have actual evidence to back yourself. The idea of, for example, in someone's probationary period, the idea that you just give them a letter, you don't give them reasons for termination, that is probably not good advice anymore. The reason for that is because adverse action has a reverse onus of proof. So if you give someone a letter, you don't give them reasons, they make the allegation, you've got to disprove it. If you do give them reasons, you don't give them 100 reasons, but you want to have something to back yourself. And whether that's emails that show that you've been performance managing them during their probation or whatever it may be, you need to have that evidence.
That's good. So just to finish off then, so when it doesn't work with somebody, you haven't made the role redundant, you can't, and they're not up to speed, you've worked with them to manage. What's the process of managing them out?
So look, performance management's an interesting area, because decision makers in an office in the city, in the commission, have got no idea for most jobs what is good and what is bad performance. And so for the most part with performance terminations, the commission will use the process that you've undertaken as a proxy for the substance of it, because how are they going to know whether you're doing, whether, like you mentioned, a 16% error rate? Is that a good error rate, a bad error rate? Is that normal? I don't really know. And so the important element of his process. Now, it is not the case that you need to have 3 strikes and you're out. It's not the case that you need to go through a formal performance management process. The law is you need to afford a fair go all round, and that will be tailored to the specific circumstances. It is normal that most employers will have spent a fair amount of time with a problem employee, but never recorded it, never documented it. It's not the sort of thing you do. That's not to say that's not relevant, but if you don't have evidence of it, it becomes more difficult to then prove that you've given a fair go all round. The key elements of a performance-based termination are that the employee was given a clear warning that their employment was under threat. Whether that's done verbally or in writing doesn't matter at law, but if it's verbally, it's harder to prove, so you might come unstuck there. And the second part of it is they need to have been given a reasonable opportunity to improve their performance, and they need to have been given access to reasonable training and assistance to get or to reach those performance goals. So obviously the goals then need to have been reasonably clearly articulated. And this is where you can often overdo it if you have performance improvement plans and all those kind of things. They often overdo it because they become so specific that they address one or two issues in the performance plan, and there's other issues that arise, and then you never raised that with me. That's actually unhelpful in a lot of ways. But those plans come from very large companies and government organisations who get held to a much higher standard of account than to smaller organisations. So your performance management process should be tailored to your circumstances. It is wise to have at least one warning, maybe two warnings. You know, the best practice would be to have that. And ideally some sort of a document, whether it's a full PIP or whether it's a smaller document that at least sets out the expectations and requirements. But at the end of all of it, you always have risk with performance terminations, and that's gets back to what the last people said was it's those hard discussions, and it's having them early and having them frankly. Like without doubt, my best client at managing employees, this is 2 decades ago, this is a long time ago, but he would manage employees that they weren't working out for whatever reason, and they'd thank him. They'd thank him when they terminated him. Right? And that might seem odd, but that's the point, is that if they know what's happening and they know they're not getting there and they've had a chance to do it and you've been frank with them, the expectations gap isn't there. It's when there's that gap in expectations between the employee. No employee comes to work thinking they're doing a bad job. Well, not none, but if you know what I mean, most employees turn up thinking they're doing a great job. They go home. This is how most people derive a large amount of their sense of self-worth. And so if all of a sudden they get a performance warning and none of the hard conversations have been had,
it comes out of the blue.
The worst thing that I see is the annual performance reviews where the manager just sort of gives them good results to try and give them some encouragement. That just gets thrown back employers' face every time. If you haven't had the honest conversation, if you haven't done it that way, you've got paperwork set up against you, your employees' expectations are somewhere else, then the shock starts. And if that shock occurs anywhere near someone taking sick leave, anywhere near someone taking, complaining about safety, especially people on the tools, or exercising the workplace right, you get in the adverse action space at that point. And that becomes a really difficult thing to manage as compared to just working through it, having the conversations at the time, and going through it from there.
That's good. Well, thanks, Tom. I'm aware that we're pretty much out of time, and I've heard Tom speak for a lot longer than this, and he's got a lot of relevant and helpful information. I was just wondering, Tom, if would you be okay if when I send out an email to everybody after this event, we've recorded it, so we're going to do a link. If I give people your email and contact numbers if they want to ask you specific questions, or I know that you don't consult for free, but is that okay to pass your details on?
Look, it is okay for NECA SA members. The good news is we do consult a little bit for free. You do get, we're members of NECA and have previously had a retainer with them, but we do give a sort of notional half-hour free advice for NECA SA members. So if you do want something, feel free to contact me.
Well, I might pass your details on anyway, because in all of my work and listening to people, I think you're one of the most knowledgeable I've certainly come across. And I've been experiencing a case with a current client that I've told her numerous times that I wish you had gone to Tom 3 months ago before all of this stuff happened. She's too far down the pipe. But I just want to say thank you to you all. 90 minutes has flown by. Particularly want to thank Mark, Lee and Ian. It's been great to have you guys, and again Tom, and for the rest of you showing up and being involved. And if you'd like to connect anytime after this, always feel free to give me a call, email me. It's different being online, because normally at a live event we'd go to the bar and have a chat, and so that I'm sure that'll come back sometime soon. Especially I'm sure SA will be the lead on that. But no, thank you so much. It's been great. The last thing I want to say is I send out a weekly piece of writing called Mindful Motivation. A number of you here get it, and I'd love to be able to send it to the few of you that don't. And like I always say to people, if you think it's crap, just feel free to unsubscribe. It's just a very short piece around leadership and personal things that contribute to our effectiveness. But thanks again. I'll hand back to Leah, and best of luck in your business. Leah.
Thank you, Ray. I don't have too much more to add, other than I just want to say, yeah, thanks so much to Ray for doing this for our members, and for the greater community for free. I think it's fantastic. I personally absolutely really enjoyed that webinar. I got a lot out of it, and I definitely had a tear at your story, Mark. So thank you. Reminding me about how important that is. Yeah, so just want to say thanks to all the members that are here, and everyone else. Obviously, members know they can always contact us about performance management things, and we've got Sabina here. But yes, definitely Fair Work Lawyers as well. We'll give half an hour free, and they also do a discounted hourly charge out rate, I think, as well. And they're our go-to for those greater IR issues and HR issues, and they're such a good team there, so couldn't recommend them more. But yeah, thanks everyone for being involved today. Thanks to the guest speakers, and particularly thank you to Ray for doing this. As I said, really appreciate it. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your night. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to send us an email, give us a call. Same, and definitely sign up to Ray's e-news. It's fantastic, and I read it every week. Thanks all. Enjoy your night.